Chapter 3. Kenter sat on the edge of his rack in Teapot 3's elite sleeve. Sweat tickled the side of his forehead. He palmed it away. Today's workout was short. There was studying to do. Yes, he had researched and practiced the early ways of electricity, but he needed to refresh his mind one last time. He revisited the written material daily, and today would be no exception. He also practiced the exhausting task of using paper and pen, though he hated writing without his mind line. The ink took too long to settle on the thin, fibrous material. His thoughts ran to Professor Maxey. The prof was such a hard-nose today in class. Maxey never let up on Kenter, constantly berating his efforts with questions he was sure the candidate had no answers for. Subjects like whistle-weed and wound sap, things that were irrelevant. Still, what an honor for Maxey to have selected him to go first. Kenter was running out of patience in his urgency to leave. Without a doubt, the clean world was where he belonged. He felt this way since he could remember. In his dreams, the clean world offered a great warmth that nothing here, not even his sister's love, could equal. Those dreams felt more real than the pods ever had. He stripped off his clothes and stepped into the shower to wash off his workout, resenting the fact that physical strength had been blown into such a major issue, into such a large part of this deal. The news spewed the fact that part of his training was bodybuilding. He was a brainiac and didn't care much for candidates required weightlifting or physical endurance exercises. Nonetheless, the workouts had molded him quite nicely into a more muscular male, as if he needed more attention from the overly eager females. As the water ran down his face, he wondered if any of the originals would be waiting when he arrived. Had they survived? Kenter himself was tired of waiting. He wanted to be there already. 3 decades had passed, almost to the day, since the first 5 candidates left the community and the machine failed during their swim. 25 years after the catastrophe, the Vision Fold re-established the Pool of Light project. Kenter waited his years of training for the Light Point portal to reopen. He was getting older by the minute. This was his only chance for a launch. With any delay, when the next swim occurred, he could be sterilized and refused, due to age. He wouldn't let that happen. He had to go this swim. After being denied admission into the academy the first time, to give way to those much younger candidates, he had pursued his goal with vengeance, finally accepted because of his sister's idea. Still, he deserved it and had worked hard to ensure nothing would get in his way. Next week, he would swim and create the path for the future of mankind. Kenter secretly hoped the originals had not survived, not because he wished them harm, of course, but something about being the first was more important to him than anything else. He wanted to be the one to survive and stake claim to the first settlement. Then he would be the oldest, the elder. He wanted to matter that much in the clean world. Being one of them was not enough. He was meant to be the first. Arden was waiting by the eating room when Kenter arrived. "Are you ever on time?" his best friend asked. Kenter's glance was brief before he walked to the tray crate and pulled out a yellow tray. Then he stepped up to the non-existent line beneath the gold sign that read Elite Menu. He selected vegetable soup with bits of actual and delectable roasted beast cooked into it as his main dish. The pieces were enormous, the size of the nail on his pinky finger. He wondered where they'd found a beast big enough to offer chunks of meat this size. Their delicious look made his mouth water as he watched the server ladle soup into the bowl. He selected fresh dwarf strawberries with real sugar cane as dessert before strutting across the room and sliding into the chair beside Arden. His friend seemed clingier than usual today. "Nervous yet?" Arden asked. "About?" Kenter replied arrogantly. "Yeah, right." Arden rolled his eyes. "You're smooth as glass." Kenter was nervous and more anxious than he would ever let on, even to Arden. His being the first to step into the pool of light would make and change the future. He was the main character, and in the limelight at the pods. Nothing bigger existed, here or on the other side. He was the oldest at training camp, the most educated. Everyone knew it. Everyone accepted it. Elated he'd out-tested Lethea on this morning's math exam, he began spooning the huge pieces of beast and vegetable bits into his mouth. The great smell and taste of it took his mind elsewhere until his friend interrupted. "Belle says Sandra's upset," said Arden. "Like I care, Ard," replied Kenter. "She says you've been ignoring her. More than usual," Arden continued. "I don't have time for her and her father's games," said Kenter. Arden stared at the beautiful female in the distance, who stood in the green serving line. He licked his lips. Her long hair rested midway down her back. The candidate's required slacks couldn't hide the fact her legs took up more than half of her body. She watched Kenter as a server spooned food onto her green tray. "She's viewing you," said Arden. Arden was ridiculous. The fact that Sandra Lockley was the prettiest female at the academy infatuated the guy. Appearance-wise, Sandra was the enticement of perfection, yes, but Kenter knew better than to let that move him. He'd found her to be self-centered and dense in the mind. Plus, she had an ulterior motive in all that she did. She thought of herself as a master manipulator and deceiver, but her intentions were obvious to him. His friend seemed to care little for the fact that Sandra's father, Senator Lockley, had it in for Kenter. The senator made repeated attempts to thwart his impending swim. Irritation rolled through Kenter. How could Arden put thoughts of females before all else, including trainings and swims? "Gravity don't wait till Tuesday," he said to Arden, whose eyes remained fixated on the green line. "Your grades are enough. The board will approve you for a date with her," replied Kenter. "I told you before, one date was one too many. I know you want to submit. It won't bother me. Actually, you'd be doing me a gift. Perhaps then she'll leave me alone." Arden raised his brows and crinkled his face into a deliberate mocking motion. Whatever he tried to resemble, he failed miserably. "Be serious for once," Kenter continued, talking through a mouthful of soup. "I don't have time for goggle-headed females pondering love. Just submit the council paperwork and take her out. But don't blow your slot over her. Double up on your shots. She's mad as they get, and she'll try to put you in the bad light if you're not cautious. Well, a worse light than you're already in anyway. I know you won't listen, but try." "I mean, view her," said Arden, ignoring his friend's advice completely. "Kenter, she's dropped her fork. She's bending down. Quick, view her. You won't fall over dead. Those legs." Kenter did not turn to see, but rather stomped his friend's foot. "Your logic's idiotic," Kenter said, shaking his head. "I'm swimming in less than a week." "I'd be using that to my advantage," replied Arden. "She told Claire she'd show you her thighs if you asked. It'd be well worth the risk, and they won't boot you from a swim this close to launch for viewing thighs. Besides, Who knows how long it'll be before your eyes will see another female's face, let alone a set of legs. You know what she tried to do. She hasn't even crossed my mind, answered Kenter. Kenter took a deep breath before asking his question. Speaking of eyes, what were you and Mize talking about in his office? When? Said Arden. This morning. Kenter knew Arden was simply guising himself as a fool. Did Leth see me? Arden replied as if surprised. If anyone was good at a guise, it was Arden. Come on, spit it. You knew she'd speak it to me. It's not like a punitive meeting with Mize has ever stayed unnoticed, Kenter scolded. What did you do this time? He waited through the long pause before his friend answered. They moved me down the list, Arden replied, scratching at his nose. Kenter stopped chewing and huffed. Again? He said under his breath. How far down? 120, answered Arden. Kenter shot a furious glare to his friend. Miser from the sulfur pits, Arden, he whispered his curse through gritted teeth. That's almost a year pushed back. Couple more times you won't go at all. If you don't stop ogling females, you'll never swim. Where are your priorities? Can't you keep your eyes on studying, training, reading, important things? You'd place a female's biology before your own swim? Arden smirked. He couldn't help it. He was not like Kenter. His every breath did not revolve around a scheduled swim. Arden just wanted a mate. Too bad the one he preferred most was slotted to swim. Arden thought the law of forcing candidates to wait until the age of 20 to match was ludicrous. He could be a fine mate to any one of a handful of females right now. He was sure of it. The feeling stirred in him whenever he viewed them. 500 milligrams of testosterone per day did not seem enough lately to squash his growing desires. Besides, he didn't believe wholeheartedly the world was really to end, at least not any time soon. He and Lethea spoke secretly on the matter just 2 days ago. They wondered if the seers had really seen the end, or if it was simply speculation. After all, everyone had heard the story since they could remember, yet nothing was any worse or better than before. The only real scare had been the other pod's solar fire 2 years ago, which wiped out a large percentage of those citizens as well as one of their candidates. But those flares never touched Teapod's community. The only devastation Teapod felt in recent times was the library fire, which occurred over a decade ago, when he was just a child. Sometimes he wondered if there was real danger of world destruction, or if it was the Pod Council's way of controlling the people. He waited to ignore the lecture he was sure he'd get from his best friend about this morning's punitive session with the head of the Science Division, Senator General Mize Maxey himself. I will never understand what goes through your mind, Kenter continued. If you can't handle the temptation, get a shot of testosterone to head it off, before the council ends your candidacy altogether. I mean, you're mad as a storm meter. At this rate, you'll be sterilized before you get a chance to leave. You've got 20 years old coming in 2 years. Are you trying to be stuck here? Arden shrugged. You can't afford another mess-up, Ard. Kenter's friend scanned the room to ensure no one was watching, before he swiped a strawberry from the plate and promptly popped it onto his awaiting tongue. His brow took on a sudden serious expression. It won't be the same here when you go, Kent. Yeah, who will keep your head clear, answered Kenter, and give you strawberries. Kenter's frustration with Arden aside, he would miss him greatly. They met their first year of training, and he'd never known a more loyal friend. No one in the pod community cared less for rules than Arden, but he was entertaining and the most fun to be around. When they initially met, Kenter had been leery of befriending him, afraid the jokester's blatant disregard for seriousness could potentially cause problems for him as well. Or worse yet, that the professors would think poorly of Kenter because of his choice of a rule-bending friend. But, as it turned out, their personalities balanced out one another, and the instructors tolerated Arden's distractions. For regardless of his diminishing ranking on the swim schedule, Arden remained a top student. He was one of the brightest in the academy, and had, on occasion, out-tested even Kenter and Luthea. Kenter knuckled his friend's shoulder, but held back his words about missing him. He could not be portrayed as weak. Any small sign of weakness would be noticed. Even at this late stage in the game, he worried the council would change its mind, choose another candidate to go in his stead. He wouldn't risk it, so he said not a word to Arden about missing anyone at the pods. A momentary glance of acknowledgment said it all. That was the extent of the verbal exchange. Arden knew what it meant. Kenter would miss him too. He could read Kenter better than anyone, other than Luthea.